When Jesus was 12 years old, it was an important time in his life, and he made that trip with his mother and stepdad, Joseph, down to the city of Jerusalem. You remember that in that story, Jesus stayed behind when they left, and Joseph and Mary didn't realize that he had stayed behind. And so after a day's journey and they couldn't find him anywhere, they turned and came back to Jerusalem to search for him. It was 2 days before they found him. And when they did find him, he was in the temple, sitting there with the teachers of the law, the religious leaders, asking them questions and answering their questions. Mary said to him, "Son, why'd you do this to us? Didn't you know that your father and I would be worried about you?" Jesus said, "Did you not know that I had to be about my Father's business, or in my Father's house, depending on which translation you read?" And then it says that he went down with them from there to Nazareth and was subject to them. Now, I want you to think about some things for just a moment with this. 12 years old. 12 years old for a Jewish boy in that day was a very special time. It was the time when they, if one, for example, was of the tribe of Levi, would go down to Jerusalem and began the training to become a priest. And he would have to learn all of the different rituals and how to do them in order to be that priest. If one were a Jewish boy that turned 12 and wanted to study under a rabbi and learn how to be a rabbi themselves, 12 years old was the time they typically did that. Jesus at 12 did neither. He went down to the temple, all right, and he was there with them for a little while, but then for the next 18 years, we know very little about what he did. What we do know is that he went back and was involved in serving and working with the family and was a carpenter. As a matter of fact, when he went back to Nazareth to teach as a rabbi or as a leader, a teacher among the people, that they were amazed when he took that scroll of Isaiah and began to read from it and expounded that meaning to say to them, "This is being fulfilled right before you now." And they couldn't believe it. They said, "Isn't this Joseph's son? Isn't he the carpenter's son?" Matthew says, Luke says, or Mark, I believe it is, says, "Isn't this the carpenter? And aren't his brothers and sisters still with us?" Well, several things are implied in that. One of them is that the father's business was something to do with going back and working with one's own hands for the next 18 years. See, Jesus said, "I need to be about my Father's business," but he didn't say, "Now I've got to stay here at the temple to learn more about how to work in the temple and to be the priest of God." Oh, he was going to be a priest after the order of Melchizedek, but those priests of the order of Aaron wouldn't have been able to train him for the job he was going to be doing. And he was going to become a prophet of God. As a matter of fact, he at 30 would begin the work as the prophet of the Lord and the teacher that would tell others about the coming kingdom. But during that time, when most of the 12-year-olds that really had religious interest were headed to training, Jesus was headed back to the carpenter shop. The word translated carpenter literally is a word that means a craftsman or an artisan, that probably was one that worked with stones and was one that was skilled with his hands to be able to do things that would build for other people. And so Jesus was that kind of worker. For 18 years, he worked with those hands, and he said that's the Father's business. See, what I want you to see most of all in this, we sometimes get mixed up on what is the Father's business. We think the Father's business is what goes on at the church building on Sundays when we gather to worship. Or the Father's business is what men like me do that spend all of their time around studying and teaching and working with people to try to help them to find God and how to live for God. But it's interesting that when Jesus said, I need to be about my Father's business, that immediately he went back home and would work for the next 18 years with his hands. When you would have seen him in that day, if you shook hands with him, it would have been rough and rugged hands that were calloused from the stones. You would have seen scars from where he had been cut and bruised from the use of the stones. It's been guessed that probably Joseph died soon after this time at 12 years of age, because when they talk about him, they say, aren't his mother and his brothers and his sister still with us? Implying that Joseph wasn't there anymore. But Jesus was one that was taking care of the family. He was the oldest son and didn't get out on his ministry until he was 30 years old. He was about the Father's business when he was working with his hands each day.